Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, hi. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you. Is it live already?
Yeah,
Or
yeah. I just started it live.
okay. Okay.
Yeah, I just started the live.
Good.
Think. Yeah, I think there is a slight echo if I keep that running on the side. So I think I'll just close the YouTube link and everyone can watch it on their YouTube. So yeah, so thanks so much for joining, Barbara,
Oh,
and thanks for
right.
the invite. Yeah. So this is a podcast where we discuss like linguistics and AI, which is related to language. So I thought like you would be the perfect guest to discuss about semantics. And thanks so much. So I have a structure for today's discussion. So I'll do a brief intro about you, and then we can start with some questions, and we can take it forward from there. So first, I'll give a very brief intro about you. So Professor Barbara Partee is Distinguished University Professor Emerita of Linguistics and Philosophy at University of Massachusetts Amherst. Professor Partee finished her BA in mathematics with high honors, with minors in Russian and philosophy from Swarthmore College in 1961. She did a PhD in linguistics from MIT in 1965. She started her teaching career at UCLA, where she taught linguistics from 1965 to 1972. She then joined the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy at UMass Amherst in 1972, where she has been since then. And Professor Partee has taught and mentored generations of linguists, and she has received numerous awards and honors for excellence in teaching and research over the decades. She has served as president of the Linguistic Society of America. She is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and also the National Academy of Sciences. Most recently, she is the recipient of the 2020 Benjamin Franklin Medal in Computer Science and Cognitive Science for her fundamental contributions that synthesize insights from linguistics, philosophy, logic, and psychology to understand how words and sentences combine to express meaning in human language. So, with that intro, thanks so much once again for joining us. And we are all really excited to learn from you. So, if I can start off with like a basic question. So the whole idea of this podcast is to sort of introduce concepts from linguistics uh, to people working in AI who might not have a background in linguistics. So like, yeah, my first question is kind of like very general. So what is semantics? So we keep hearing the term semantics quite a lot. And what is semantics? And what is formal semantics? So the subpart of that question. And also, how is it different from like things like word meaning or phrase meaning? And also the question of like, what is language understanding? So with language understanding and the terms reasoning, does that involve like computations over like truth tables? So like logical operations over truth tables. And also one last question which is related, and how do humans acquire this ability? So we know about like syntax, where we acquire the ability to put together words to form acceptable sentences. But how do we acquire this ability of using those sentences to refer to things in the world and to reason about them?
Okay. That's a lot. Thank you so much for inviting me. So let me just try a little bit. So semantics is looked at from so many points of view. What everybody has in common is semantics is the study of meaning, but there are a lot of different notions of what meaning is, and semantics has different meanings in psychology and in linguistics, and in ordinary life, where people say, "Oh, that argument, that's just semantics." But for linguists, semantics is one of the crucial components of human linguistic competence, along with phonology, syntax, etc. Uh, and the key questions are, how do we get the meanings of whole sentences from the meanings of the words in them? That part I will refer to as compositional semantics. It can also be approached in many different ways, but everybody has to have some idea about how you build up the meanings of the bigger parts from the meanings of their subparts. And formal semantics, the field that I do, is very much focused on that issue, which is largely, partly separate from the question of what word meanings are like. I mean, of course they're connected, because if you're going to figure out how to put together meanings of words to get meanings of sentences, you have to have some idea about the meanings of words. But so for many years, semantics in linguistics was really concerned with something like semantic representations. It started from syntax in a way, but when people noticed that a sentence like "every man loves one woman" is ambiguous, then people started drawing trees that would represent whether every has higher scope or whether one has higher scope. And semantics was kind of this disambiguating the ambiguous sentences by finding different structures for them. And it wasn't until the linguists began learning more about what logicians and philosophers of language were doing that the idea of truth conditions came in as central, and that's central in formal semantics. Formal semantics is sometimes called possible worlds semantics, because one is thinking about meaning in terms of truth conditions. It's not all of the meaning of a sentence. There's connotation and things like that, but a core part of the meaning of any sentence is the conditions under which it's true. I think Max Cresswell famously said, "We may not know what meaning is, but we can all agree that if we have if two sentences are such that we can find a situation in which one of them is true and the other is clearly false, then we know those two sentences do not have the same meaning." That sounds so simplistic, but you can get a lot of mileage out of that basic observation. In formal semantics, when we do think about meanings of words, which we have to some extent, it's a kind of a top-down approach. A meaning of a word is whatever it has to be to make the right contribution to the truth conditions of the sentences it occurs in. And that leads to conclusions that, for instance, the meaning of a proper name is the entity it denotes, or the meaning of a one-place predicate word like a noun or an adjective is the property that is picked out by that noun or adjective. The reference would be a set in that case, a set of entities. So man denotes the set of men as its extension, but the intention is consider all possible worlds and look at the entities in them and decide which are the men there. It's not just what is the actual set of men in the actual world. And in fact, sometimes people are confused and think that formal semanticists care about truth in the actual world. And since we obviously don't know everything about the actual world, that would put us in a impossible kind of mental state. If to know the meaning of the word man, you had to know what were all the men in the actual world. But it's the truth conditions are concerned with the possible worlds. Just imagine being given somehow the possible situation, then what is it? What's the set that's picked out in that situation as the set of men or the set of yellow things, etc. Let me see. There are a lot of parts to your questions, and I'm not sure I remember all of them. But yeah, just let me try. Maybe I could try to give a little sketch with a little example of how the compositional part of formal semantics works. So Frege, who is one of our philosophical founders in a way, one of his big ideas was that a lot of meanings can be structured into systems of functions and arguments. This is an idea that's made its way into linguistics standardly now, but it was brand new when we first heard it from the philosophers. That when a verb combines with a direct object, like hit the dog, then hit is a function, and the dog is an argument, and the meaning of the verb phrase hit the dog is formed by applying that function to that argument. Yeah. So, and the denotation of a verb phrase is thought of as a function from entities to truth values, because the denotation of a sentence, this is just the extension, not the sense. The denotation of the sentence is taken to be a truth value. So the denotation of a verb phrase and the denotation of a proper name like John is an entity. So the denotation of the verb phrase should be a function from entities to truth values. And that kind of function, that's just the characteristic function of a set. So a verb phrase like loves Mary denotes the set of entities that love Mary. And we dig down into the syntactic structures, figuring out what the denotations of their parts have to be to get the denotation of the whole to come out right. So now common nouns like cat or house, those are also just one-place predicates, functions from entities to truth values. Adjectives like gray, they denote also one-place predicates. And so in conjunction of the combination of an adjective and a noun, like a gray cat, that is just combining two one-place predicates. That can be taken as simple set intersection or predicate conjunction. So it's kind of like that all the way down the tree. Some things are trickier to figure out. A word like only is pretty complicated because it occurs in many different places and does very interesting things with the truth values. Now, everything I said so far was all on the extensional level. I wasn't bringing in the possible worlds at all. We need possible worlds to talk about truth conditions. So for a sentence, the meaning of a sentence is something more like a function from different possible worlds to truth values. That is a characterization of all the conditions under which that sentence would be true. And correspondingly, the meaning of a noun or an adjective or an intransitive verb is a function from possible worlds to sets. And that's what we mean by property. So all those things, all those intentional things are modeled as functions from possible worlds to whatever the corresponding exponents are. And some simple syntactic combinations even require a function that applies to the intension of its argument, not just the extension. So for instance, the adjective alleged is very different from an adjective like gray. An alleged murderer is not someone who is a murderer and is an alleged entity. It's alleged applies to the intention of murderer, and it means someone who is said to have that property, something like that. And there are verbs like try that require the intention of the verb phrase complement to them. And transitive verbs like seek are very different from extensional transitive verbs like hit. So among the syntactically complex constructions, we can build some that are semantically, they can be syntactically complex, but semantically very simple. So relative clauses are really cool. A relative clause like who knows Mary in a phrase like, no, who loves Mary in a phrase like boy who loves Mary, that relative clause who loves Mary, that's also just a one-place predicate. It's derived from something like, you can think of it as an open sentence with a variable, X loves Mary. And lambda abstraction, formal semantics is love lambdas. Lambda abstraction is a way, in this case, of forming a set expression from a sentence type expression. So lambda X loves Mary, that's how you represent who loves Mary. And that picks out a function from entities to truth values. That from any entity, an entity will be in the corresponding set if it satisfies X loves Mary. And boy who loves Mary, again, it's just like adjective noun combination. It's just set intersection. So it's the set of things that are boys and love Mary. Um, that's I mean that's really cool, and 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 I guess yeah, that's a natural segue into this question about acquisition. You know, how does the kid learn all of this? In every part of linguistics, syntax, phonology, everything, a core driving question for all of us is what must the human language faculty be like in order for us to acquire this really amazing system of language? Um, and 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 within that big question, a lot of it really comes down to trying to figure out which things are universal, which things occur in every human language, in syntax and in semantics, and which things vary from language to language. Because on the general Chomskyan perspective on human language competence, the things that are universal are things that are built in. You know, we don't have to learn those. We've got those. We just have to sort our way through what's specific to the language we're surrounded by when we're babies to figure out, for instance, and is probably universal. So you have to figure out which word of all the words you're hearing is and if you've got other words and you've got clues about the meaning of what you're hearing, you can say, oh, this must be an and. uh, whereas for the say for and this is another big difference with lexical semantics. Take all the color words. You've got to learn which word is which color. That's arbitrary. That differs from language to language. Susan Carey did some wonderful experiments about kids learning color words, and I think this is a nice illustration of how if we've got compositionality, we know how the words combine to make the sentence meaning, and we've got other parts of our language pinned down, so we know the syntactic structure and the meanings of other parts of the sentence. When Susan Carey would say to a kid, "Go bring me the chromium tray, not the red tray, but the chromium tray," she put in that nice little not this but that really clued them in that it must be a color word, right? So here's this word chromium they never heard before, but they understood the rest of the sentence. And then it's sort of like doing long division. You can compute the meaning of the whole sentence with this little variable in it for chromium, whatever it is. And then you go look in the corner and there's one tray that's a funny color. And there's the solution to your problem. And Susan says, kids learn that like on one exposure. You bring them back 2 weeks later and they can pick out the chromium tray from all the other colored trays. So compositionality is really a central part of what formal semanticists have focused on. And it's compositionality that really helps in acquisition because the context often gives you some clues. If you know enough of the parts, then you get clues from the context of what that sentence might have meant. And then you use compositionality to work backwards and fill in meaning of the word you didn't know before. So yeah, did I hit all the things you wanted in that first question?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks so much for that high-level overview of semantics for our listeners. I love the examples. Like each of those was like, a very good refresher for me, especially the last example about like the color terms. It's really fascinating. So yeah, thanks so much for introducing us to the rich structure of like semantics and language. So my next question is kind of related to the point that we just discussed, like compositionality. So like in AI right now, we have a number of like models which are like large language models, which are being claimed to be capable of understanding and reasoning and stuff. So like famously, most recently, there was a model called ChatGPT, which kind of made a lot of news. So one of the big problems which many researchers have pointed out is there is no notion of semantics, like there is no semantic grounding in these models. And some have even called them stochastic parrots, which kind of makes sense because like these models are trained to basically generate like strings of sentences, which are like highly probable and acceptable. So there is no notion of truth built into their training. So we've discussed truth conditions, and I actually also have an additional question, which is like this notion of like possible worlds, we just don't have that. Like there is no appreciation of possible world semantics in, the AI community. So like the solution that they have right now. So yeah, firstly, so with ChatGPT, one of the frameworks that was introduced and was hyped a lot is reinforcement learning, where like you have the model generate sentences, and then you have human raters rate those sentences, and then you kind of improve the model to learn how to generate the sentences which have higher rating. But those ratings don't have to do, they could be like, they don't have to correspond to truth, number one, and they also don't have any notion of possible worlds. So another thing, fancy term which has come up is like multimodal models, where like if you have a description, if you have a sentence, and if you have an accompanying image, you could train a model using a combination of the two. But yeah, my understanding is, based on my background in like semantics, so the reasoning is about thinking about possible worlds. It's not just about the example that you gave. It's never possible to sort of like have the full set of men to evaluate the truth value of a sentence. So it's a function from possible worlds to truth values. So that notion is completely missing. So yeah, isn't this like a huge fallacy? And I'd like to get your thoughts on this.
Oh boy, that's a great question, and and I think it's a kind of conundrum that's going to be with us as AI keeps developing, because it's impressive. It's not my field, I'm watching from the side. I have some of our students are now, more of our students now go into computational. Well, we used to call it computational linguistics. I guess then it became natural language processing. Now it's all AI, I guess. But yeah, some of our students are going in those things. I think, I forget which year it was. It was around 2015. MIT had a 150th anniversary celebration, and they had a lot of different panels in the general areas of language, mind, and computation. And I was part of a sort of golden oldies panel, older people talking about the development of their fields since way back when. And I gave a 10-minute overview of what had happened in formal semantics in the last 50 years. And I ended by saying that we have figured out a lot of things, and we've made huge progress, but I doubt that the things that we do, which are very theoretical, would be of any interest to Google, for instance. Well, Peter Norvig was in the audience, and he was the research director at Google, and he came up after it. He said, well, we may start hiring semanticists soon, because all of our techniques don't tell us very much about negation. Because really the core, if I understand it right, the core idea behind all the large language models, etc., is that words that have very similar distribution must have very similar meaning. I think that's the basic insight, and that's true. That's a fact. But similar is a dangerous concept, because opposites have very similar meanings. That I was surprised when I first realized that. That the opposite of king isn't pauper. The opposite of king might be queen. If you take, well, the opposite of king could be queen. I shouldn't take that example. I should take, the opposite of big is small, right? And big and small have everything in common about their meaning except one dimension, right? And in general, opposites are words that are just alike in their meaning except differing on one most salient dimension. And so, but with respect to the truth conditions of a sentence, you reverse some salient dimension like big versus small, you'll change true into false. I mean, it makes a huge difference to the actual meaning. And negation takes, if it's the negation of the main clause of the sentence, takes any sentence it's in and switches true and false. So if you really care about using language to reason correctly, and that's presumably a huge part of what language is for, then you've got to care about the difference between a sentence and its negation, no matter how similar they may be in terms of the distribution of all the words in them. So I suspect, I mean, I know there are people in this field who are working on things like negation and making progress on it, and I don't know how that works, but to ignore it and to just work on the whether a sentence is well formed or not, whether it's a good possible sentence or not, and what word is likely to come next, that's never going to get you to the real truth conditions. So I'm sure, I mean, I'm sure it's a limit that people are going to hit at some point. You know, Google and the Google searches, it didn't matter so much because there, what you were always looking for was relevance. When you do a Google search, you're not looking directly for truth. You're looking for getting something relevant to what you care about. And similarity is good for relevance. Right? But when truth matters, then I think the things we study are bound to matter. Let me see. Did I have an example that I wanted to mention with that? No, not directly.
I
Oh,
think that's such a great point. Like, the difference between relevance and truth. Like, yeah, so most of the methods that we're currently using, where we have like a sort of a vector representation of the meaning of a sentence, they work great when it comes to like search, like, functions like search in Google. But then if you want reasoning, then I think you have to go beyond that. And there has to be a way of factoring in compositionality, because you need to be able to, exactly compute the meaning, like the truth conditions that a sentence is referring to. Yeah,
yeah.
please.
Yeah. I mean, if you're, I mean, you're not only interested in search for relevant stuff. You want question answering systems. You want systems that will extract the summarize the content of something that they've read, and missing a negation could could totally certainly mess that up. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I had a note to myself to tell the Peter Norvig anecdote, and I did.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that was 2011. That was one of the first things I watched, like the Mind, Machines, and Brains Symposium. And
Yes.
then you were like, yeah, there was Sidney Brenner and Chomsky and Malinowski. Yeah, yourself and uh, Patrick Winston.
Yes.
Yeah, I probably watched it like, a dozen times.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Yeah. Chomsky was my teacher, so it was very exciting to be on the same stage with him.
So my next question today is mainly about like the history of semantics. So another thing I wanted to mention was the first time I heard you live was in the fall of 2013, when you came to deliver a symposium talk at MIT Linguistics, and it was about the history of semantics. And it just blew my mind because I'd studied all those concepts like, at various stages. So Boolean logic, as well as the work of Russell and Church. But then I never connected all of those. And that one talk basically, connected all the dots for me. And essentially all these influential thinkers, what they were trying to do was trying to understand logic, semantics, and reasoning over the last like 200 years. So yeah, I'd like to, please, if you can give us like a brief outline of the history of semantics, that would be great.
Okay, it's harder to do it without slides, but let me try. Let me try to just talk it. So I've got to say, my mind was blown when I first went to UCLA in 72, and my old friend David Lewis, who's one of the greatest philosophers of the century, was there, and one day he came over and he said, my colleague Richard Montague is starting to do things that you might find interesting, because he knew me well enough to guess that very correctly. So Montague was a logician and working on foundations of set theory and such things, and he turned his attention to trying to describe the semantics of language using the same kinds of techniques that logicians had been using since Tarski to describe the semantics of their logical languages, like first-order predicate logic, etc., and apply those same techniques to natural language. And that involved doing compositional semantics, give a syntax, have the semantic rules apply in tandem with the syntactic rules, building up the meanings of the expressions as the expressions are built up. And and he had a sizable fragment of natural language, of English, that he had applied this to. And I started going to his classes. And well, at first I was glad David Lewis was there, because I had to ask all these stupid questions like, what's a lambda? I saw my first lambda that was fall of '68. Yeah. And I was very excited with what Montague was doing, because this whole idea of truth conditions had not entered linguistics at that time. At that time, semanticists, starting with Katzenfoder and then Lakoff and Ross and the generative semantics, it was all drawing trees. And really, the only thing really getting explicitly represented was something like scope relations or something. And what the meanings were, it was that question wasn't asked. I mean, I guess that was considered a philosophical question or something. And to have this idea that truth conditions are the basic data, just like for syntax, grammaticality judgments are the basic data on which you build this whole system. That really changed the game. I mean, the thing I told you about relative clauses, that blew my mind. That's how you think about relative clauses. Relative clauses are sentence-sized adjectives, and we form them with lambda abstraction, and take any sentence and have a variable in it, and you can build a relative clause. And then it just combines by set intersection. And you can show why you have to put the noun and the relative clause together before you put on the, for instance. You can't take the plus noun and then put on a relative clause, or you could only get a non-restrictive meaning. I mean, all those, like what that structure was. So this was even feeding into syntax, because what that structure was had been a matter of debate among linguists, whether the article combines with the noun before the relative clause goes on or after. And it never occurred to us that there's a very simple semantic answer, that it's got to be, you've got to put all the modifiers on the noun before you put on a the or an every or something, or you can't possibly compute the meaning of the whole correctly. So for history, the ideas that I got from Montague, and I immediately started working on trying to put Montague and Chomsky together, because Montague's syntax was pretty primitive. Although it was nice. It was a variant of categorical grammar in a sense, and it was pretty, it wasn't bad. And he did have the architectural idea of the syntactic rules and semantic rules going hand in hand, so that every time you put things together, you also correspondingly put their meanings together. And it's the derivation of the tree that guides the compositional semantics. But so where did he get all that? Where did all that come from? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, a lot goes back to Frege. Frege was the one who had the idea that you could look at meanings in terms of functions and arguments in many cases. And that structure went into the later development of type theory, which Russell and others, put in to avoid paradox. Frege had some paradox problems in his idea of functions and arguments. Because the function should be, in a certain sense, always of a higher type than its argument, and if you're not careful, you might violate that. And Frege also had the basic idea of compositionality. Frege was and you mentioned reasoning. I've got to put in a bit about the argument between Frege and John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill was arguing that semantics is a branch of psychology, and even that logic is a branch of psychology. And Frege was very vehemently arguing that logic is not a branch of psychology. Human reasoners sometimes reason correctly, sometimes don't reason correctly. And Frege said, logic is really like mathematics. These are some abstract absolute truths that we build on, and in our reasoning, we try to get it right. But that logic is no more a science of what we think is right than mathematics is a science of what we think is, is the result of some equation. That there are abstract truths that we can discover, and we can use our fallible human minds to discover the abstract truths that lie behind reasoning when it is working at its best. So there's a corresponding debate within linguistics today. Chomsky is still what we could call an internalist. He got a long way, and I think for syntax this works perfectly, to say that what's in our mind is what determines what the syntax of our language is. And he hasn't been very keen on recognizing that that might not be completely the case in semantics. In semantics, it's probably the case for word meanings. What our words mean is up to our human mentality. But insofar as sentence meaning includes truth conditions and entailment relations, we don't always know whether one sentence entails another. Undecidability results tell us we're not logically omniscient. And yet, the Janar Kerkia is one who has really emphasized the importance of our what he calls spontaneous logicality of human reasoning and language. And he's shown all kinds of ways where it's built into the way the grammar of the language works, and the semantics in particular. So Frege was arguing that this structure he was finding with the assumptions of possible worlds, we're not claiming that we could represent all possible worlds in our head. We've got to. It's an open question to figure out what kind of approximations and finite representations we use with our finite brains. But we have the same problem of how do we understand the real numbers? Not by being able to represent them all, right? So that's an exciting kind of foundational difference that we got from the logicians and philosophers. So it went on through Frege and Russell and Tarski. I think early Wittgenstein, I think, was the one who suggested meanings are basically truth conditions. Later Wittgenstein rejected it. So these things go back and forth. Part of it has to do with where do you want to draw the line at what you count as meaning. Because I've talked about the truth conditional core, because it's the part that seems to work. I mean, linguists are instrumentalists. We're not. We can be interested in philosophy, but by our profession, we're not philosophers. So we don't care how things really work. But the idea that meanings are at their core truth conditions really gives a nice handle on how to construct syntax and semantics. And the field has just exploded, even while foundational questions about internalism and externalism remain unsettled. The progress is unmistakable. So after Montague was one of the sources for how this stuff got into linguistics. David Lewis was another. My colleague Angelica Kratzer, who has made tremendous contributions to formal semantics, she fusses that I point to Montague as our founder, and she said, "Well, he's not my founder. My founder is David Lewis," and I agree. David Lewis is a greater philosopher than Montague was, but in terms of the paths into the field, mine was through Montague and with David Lewis's help, and the field, once linguists and philosophers got working on these things together, it started exploding, and after a little while, the linguists kind of absorbed it. It became a core part of linguistics, and there's still a lot of linguistics philosophy interaction, but it was crucial for the beginnings, and it was how truth conditions got into linguistics. And now there's plenty of linguists who are trained in linguistics and enough logic to be able to carry this all forward and make all kinds of innovations in it.
Thanks so much. Yeah, so like the richness of ideas never ceases to amaze me. Like there is so much like rich ideas there. And yeah, in AI, we are like kind of, not able to understand, that this is like a 200-year-old problem that, a lot of influential thinkers have been trying to solve. So like I feel like the language understanding problem is kind of caricatured. Like we are making like a very not we're not addressing the whole problem. Like we kind of have very caricatured goals, and then we have models which achieve those goals, and then we declare that language understanding has been achieved. But I think, yeah, like if we actually think about the scope of the problem, it's a really big problem, and yeah, I think we should address it as such. We should give it like the respect that it deserves. So
But let me put a caveat on what you just said and say, don't knock your own field too much, because just as when my student, now already retired great linguist Irena Heim, was at Texas when I gave a talk there, and afterwards she berated me for giving too much credit to the philosophers and not enough credit to the linguists. I mean, let me also say, I know that there are people working in your field who are really seriously working on things like negation,
mhm.
and and uh, and who know that, and who do know that there are places where people do study linguistics and AI, and they're putting these ideas together. So I'm optimistic. I mean, that it's just you do what you can with the tools that you really understand, but at the same time, I think you guys are keeping your eyes on the fact that there's more to life than the similarity distributions of the words.
Yeah, that's such a nice way to put it. And yeah, Irina was actually my teacher as well. So one of my first projects that I thought of was to take the Hyman Krautzer textbook that we had for
Uh,
semantics and then try to implement that as a semantic parser. So if you
uh,
have like the trees coming from a syntactic parser, can you have like a Hyman Krautzer kind of, a semantic parser which can interpret those trees and come
uh,
up with like the denotations. But
uh-huh,
yeah, I never got around to
uh,
building it. But
uh,
yeah, like I would be happy to see like the AI community appreciate those ideas, and like, us building such models where, we can actually compute the semantic denotation of a sentence rather
yep,
than have like a vector of like real valued numbers, and we don't exactly know where the meaning lies, and we can't really understand the compositionality from that vector of numbers. So yeah, so all of that, yeah, brings back many good memories as well.
great,
So,
it's great. Yeah, one of my one early graduate student here, Bipin Indurkia, came from India, and then he had done his master's degree in Tilburg, um, with Remco Ska and Jan Landsbergen. And for his master's thesis, he had built a parser for Montague grammar. And so when he got to
oh,
UMass,
amazing,
yeah, and
amazing.
yeah,
I
and he,
actually know Bipin, and I
you know,
didn't know that. Yeah, I didn't know that he worked under you.
yeah, well, I mean, he was in the computer science department, but I was on his dissertation committee,
Oh,
and when
fantastic.
I had a very interesting project in the 80s in from System Development Foundation, the same people who founded CSLI out at Stanford for their big language and computation project. Um, I took a team from UMass to Stanford for a summer to look at their computational environment as well as what they were doing theoretically. And I had 3 linguistics graduate students and Bipin as my research assistant, and Bipin did a great job of helping us decide that no, we did not want dandelion computers here at UMass, because yeah, I don't know if you knew anything about that history, but the guy who was giving out these grants had some special connection to Xerox PARC and loved their dandelion computers. And that was the first time I ever saw Windows. This was like 84 or something like that. Um, and Windows, that was a whole exciting thing. But we did learn that they couldn't run their computers without having a permanent tech person on staff because they were very fragile and very, very difficult. So we managed to get a nice grant where we could focus on the research and not try to mimic their computational environment. But yeah, but Bipin is a wonderful example of somebody who is at home in multiple worlds, and in computer science and in linguistics and in cognitive science. He when he said he wanted to do a dissertation on metaphor in computer science, my first thought was, oh, don't try to do metaphor. Metaphor is too hard and too fuzzy and too, it doesn't sound like a computer science kind of topic. But then I persuaded him, well, look, maybe you could make me happy if you'd work on metaphor in some kind of structured area like trees. There are trees in the field. There are linguistic trees. There are family trees, and so yeah. But he went on from there. Yeah.
Amazing, amazing. Because Bipin started the cognitive science lab at my alma mater, so where I was doing my master's, and there were students of his working on metaphor. I took courses with him on cognition, and also he had one on music perception, which I took. And we were reading like Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, and trying to correlate it. Amazing. I had no clue about this history at all. I didn't know. Yeah.
That's fun. And his daughter is a graduate student in math here now. So Bipin comes and visits, and I see him almost every year, and it's wonderful to be in touch. But sometimes he's in Poland, sometimes he's in Japan, sometimes he's in India, and
that's amazing. Yeah.
Quite a Renaissance man.
So the other question I have just before we wrap up is kind of related to the metaphors thing. So I also read this book by George Lakoff, the metaphors we live by. So the idea that most of the verbs in English are based on certain metaphors, and this is kind of related to many projects in computational linguistics, NLP, like FrameNet and stuff, where they have sort of developed these kind of huge resources, ontologies, basically, where the meaning of the verbs could be related. So what do you think about those efforts?
Yeah, so George Lakoff and I got into a big argument one time, because he said, well, formal semantics, you just work on the easy problems like entailment. You don't work on the hard problems like metaphor. Well, the part we agreed on is that metaphor is hard, and that formal semantics has not done a whole lot to approach that problem, because I don't consider the things we work on to be too easy. I consider them to be tractable, and I like to work on tractable problems. But I agree. This is part of why I'm careful to say truth conditions is not all there is to meaning, because I don't think you can get too far on metaphor just thinking in terms of truth conditions. It's where you have to start thinking about connotations and contextual knowledge. And the problem, I haven't said much about lexical meaning, have I? I mean, the lexical meaning is all the part that formal semanticists work on is the part that contributes to truth conditions. So in verb meaning, we've done a lot of work on the aspectual properties of different verbs that helps to explain how they combine with different adverbs, etc. But along with that part of lexical meaning, I think I'm not an expert, but my own kind of preferred pictures, I think of the lexicon as kind of a hub for all kinds of knowledge. That certainly the visual representations that are part of the meaning of certain words. There's these famous things that you ask somebody to define helix, and they will always take their finger and and do a little visual diagram. By the way, do you know you have the sun in your face or something? At least on my screen, it looks funny.
Yeah, I think I have to change. I didn't realize that the sun would change the direction here.
Yeah, so I suppose to work on metaphor, you really have to seriously think about so many aspects of word meaning besides their contributions to truth conditions. You have to think about value judgments. You have to think about the context. I mean, there are often that's good now. There are often near synonyms, like, well, I mean, just think of all the different ways of referring to woman that differ in terms of positive and negative connotations, or insult or adoration, etc. I mean, all those dimensions are very hard to put into truth conditional aspects of meaning, but they certainly relate to metaphors. I mean, what animals are used to refer to people of certain kinds, etc. So all I can say is that I agree that metaphor is really important. I admire Bipin for being brave enough to really work on it and make real progress. And it's, for me, it's just a kind of divide and conquer. The problems I work on are back from why I did like math as a subject to study, and was I was actually afraid to take literature courses when I was an undergraduate, because I liked getting good grades, and when it came to literature, I did not understand what made one answer to a question right and another answer to a question wrong. So I admit to being a little bit cowardly in some respects, and stick to problems that I think I know how to tell a right answer from a wrong one.
I think, yeah, that's such a great point that you made. Like, this is also kind of related to the arts versus humanities divide, like especially in the tech industry.
Versus
Arts versus sciences divide. So like the tech industry doesn't appreciate enough like how, you know, rich the humanities and liberal arts fields are. Like, you know, there is like no one answer, and it's all about like critical thinking. It's all about creativity, and like it's most of the problems that come out of those areas are like, you know, they're extremely challenging. So it's not like, you know, they're not always tractable. So I think, yeah, it's important. It's a very important point for us to actually think about that, you know, how we can develop an appreciation for like these areas and read from these areas.
That's right. I mean, I recognize my own limitations in that regard, and so if you know, it's fair to work on problems that suit your temperament, but you've got to, if you're in a position to be supporting research, you've got to be supporting the research of the kind of things that you don't yourself feel as comfortable working on too, right? Yeah.
Thanks so much, Barbara. So I think, yeah, that's all for today's episode. So I've only planned like 3 questions. So yeah, so I hope this was really informative for all our listeners. And if you have a chance, like if you know, we would like to invite you back if it's possible to, you know, have a conversation with you again.
Sure. Well, thank you. I enjoyed it very much. I liked your questions.
Thanks so much, Barbara.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a
Bye.
nice day. Bye.
Bye. Bye.